Hi friends, I'm going to share a little video about running shoes and some considerations for when you're buying running shoes, how to know if they're worn out or not, and general information about something that I find very exciting. So tag along and enjoy this video. All right, so the first major consideration when you're getting a new pair of running shoes should be the sizing of the shoe and the upper, and I'll go into what that means in a moment. So in general, you've probably gone to a store and you've gotten a pair of shoes and they're either too long or they're too short. The main way to know if your shoe is the right length is if you can fit a thumb length or a finger length in between your toe and the bumper. So I'll show you with this shoe here. So as you can see, there's this rubber bit here. If there's a finger width or a thumb width separating where your big toe is and the front of the shoe, that should be enough space for you to have a comfortable fit. Something people often overlook is that even if a shoe is too large, that can be just as detrimental as having a shoe that's too small. That's because if a shoe is too large, it's going to swim around, your foot's going to swim around in the shoe, and you won't get good lockdown. Lockdown is basically when your midfoot is well secured to the top of the shoe. The top of the shoe or the upper, this is the material that your foot is mostly wrapped around. There's many types of different upper material. For example, this is a knit mesh. So try and zoom in. As you can see, basically these are fibers that have been woven. Thing with a knit upper is it will often stretch, and over time that can make the shoe harder to get a good lockdown in, and that means you're going to have to tie the laces tighter. In a previous video, I showed that one way to overcome this is to employ the runner's loop. So that's where you have the loops here and you run the laces through them. But you should always be looking for a shoe that you don't have to do these things for. So if you have a pair of shoes that fit comfortably, that's the main goal, because you will get stretching with the upper and that will make lockdown harder. So that's the first thing to consider with your shoe. Make sure it fits, make sure it's not too small or too large. Those are both important considerations. Now, another thing that was brought up that I thought I would address is how does the shoe work with your running style or your gait and your foot strike? And I'll explain what those terms mean in a moment. So in general, 95% of runners from developed countries, basically places where people wear shoes, are heel strikers. So I'll use a different example with a different shoe, but in general, most people when they're running, they land with the heel, and that's how it makes sense anatomically how we walk. So 95% of people, whether they think they do or not, land with the heel. So that's something to consider when you're buying a pair of shoes. If someone says that the shoes are good for forefoot strikers, that would mean you're landing on the front. Or a midfoot striker, which is what I sort of aim to be, though to be honest, I land on the heel quite often as well. A midfoot strike is basically you land dead in the center when you're running. There are a few things that can impact the performance of a shoe depending on your foot strike or facilitate different types of running. So most people, when they land, the sort of heel comes down first, then they transition to midfoot, and then toe off. If the heel is higher, this is known as the drop. So basically, like with this shoe, you can see this heel is really chunky. This has a 30mm heel, so that means there's 30mm of space between your heel and the bottom, and there's 22mm in the front. So the difference between those is 8 millimeters. That's not that high. On average, you'll have between 5 and 12 millimeters difference. But if the difference is higher, that will promote heel striking. It's just sort of a natural thing. Imagine if you're wearing a pair of high heels. You're going to land on your heels because where else are you going to land? Whereas if you have a lower drop pair of shoes, these only have a 4 millimeter difference between the heel and the forefoot. So as you can see, very similar. With that type of shoe, with a lower drop, you're going to land on your forefoot or midfoot more comfortably and more easily. A few more things to consider, and these are general running tips. In general, the best form you can have is if you aim to land with your foot as close to your body as possible. So think about when you're stretching your foot out, when you're walking, you would like your foot to basically land as close to your body as you can with a slightly bent knee and a cadence of 180 steps per minute. If you aim for that goal, you'll have less injury as a runner. So that's something to consider. Another thing that is important for considering when you think about your foot strike and your running is the stability that you can achieve in a shoe. So there's a few ways of achieving stability. There's one more traditional way. I don't have a good pair of shoes as an example for this because I don't use them. But there are shoes that are called motion control or stability shoes that basically have a hard medial post. So in a shoe like this, they'll basically be on the inside of the shoe. There'll be like a hard piece of plastic that sort of keeps the shoe. It's meant to sort of stabilize your foot when you land. This is generally not considered a good practice as far as preventing running injury. There's not a lot of evidence that shoes that have this medial posting actually changes your running dynamics or improves your risk of injury. Another thing you can do, though, that some shoemakers do to achieve stability, they basically just have a very wide platform. So as you can see there, that's a huge forefoot. So when you land with this shoe, you have all of that basically keeping your foot stable. The other thing that shoes can do to achieve stability is have high sidewalls. So as you can see here, your foot is recessed deep inside this sidewall, and that stabilizes your foot. That's another thing you can do, and that's a better way to achieve stability with a pair of running shoes. All right. So what's another thing to consider as a runner when you're getting a new pair of shoes? What is the midsole? So midsole, it's kind of technical running shoe jargon, but basically it's what separates. It's the soft bit that's in between your foot and the outsole. The outsole is the rubbery bit at the bottom of the shoe. So it's the squishy stuff in between. Most shoes are EVA or ethyl vinyl acetate, and that's just basically foam. Give you another example. So EVA is the generic foam that most shoes are made out of. EVA has an energy return of about 50%. You can get more expensive shoes made out of newer compounds like TPU or tempered polyurethane, or PBEX, which is, I'll give you an example of that in a moment, which will give you energy return closer to 80%. So there's some variation around that. With a pair of EVA-based running shoes, your lifespan for the shoe will be anywhere from 500 to 900 kilometers. That's usually as far as you can take them because they start to flatten out after that point. You can get more life with other compounds. Another thing that you can do with the midsole is you can infuse it with supercritical gas like nitrogen. So that sounds super fancy and, like something that would really, cost a lot of money, but it's actually a cheap way to make a shoe both more durable and have a higher energy return. So a good example of that is this. This is the Skechers Go Run Ride 8. And this shoe, I'll talk more about brand preferences, but this shoe, very durable and very lightweight and has good energy return. That's because this has been infused with nitrogen. So there's little bubbles inside the midsole, and that makes it more durable and have higher energy return. One reason that midsole is important is that's basically what's providing all of the shock absorption when you're running. And that's why it's actually more important to look at the lifespan of the midsole when you're considering the durability of your shoes. So I'll give you an example. This is an EVA shoe, EVA midsole shoe. Let's have a look at the bottom. Totally shredded, completely shredded. And that's something that Hoka does a lot. They basically don't put any rubber on the bottom to save weight. And the shoes are made out of EVA. They end up looking really nasty really quickly. But that's not actually what you need to consider when you're looking at whether or not the shoe has passed its use-by date or not. What you want to look for in shoes is creasing. So I'll show you with this. Basically, once your foam starts to do that, and that's not that bad because that's just a little bit of creasing, that indicates that the midsole has started to flatten out and you're going to start losing. Try and find another example. That's pretty minor as well. But no, you can't see that. Here, actually, this is a good example. This is good, yeah. So as you can see there, that creasing is basically from repeated compression of the midsole. And once that starts to happen, that's a good indicator that your shoes might have worn out and you need to replace them, regardless of how worn the rubber is in the bottom. So both can be true. There can be too much midsole wear and creasing, but the rubber is fine, or the rubber can be completely shredded, but there's no midsole creasing and you can keep using those shoes until they're comfortable. So that's something to consider. Performance. High performance in running shoes, there's a lot of super shoes that have come out recently. They often have a few key components. So one is low weight, and weight is very important. 100 grams of weight equates to about 1% running economy. So if a shoe is 100 grams lighter than another shoe, it's going to be 1% more efficient. Often shoes will have plates or rods that are made out of carbon fiber or other materials that will basically act as a spring. The other thing is midsole compounds. So I mentioned earlier that like some shoes will have 50% energy return. Here's an example of a super shoe. This is the Saucony Endorphin Pro. This shoe is made out of Pebax. So if you have a, let's see, you have a look that basically it's a bit like Adidas Boost, but it's these little pellets that have been compressed together. That's meant to have 80% energy return. The shoe only weighs 200 grams, so relatively light, and it has a carbon fiber plate that acts as a spring. So you combine all of those things and you get a pair of shoes that has low weight, good energy return, and that carbon fiber plate acting as a spring. That's meant to improve running economy between 1% and 5%. A few things to note though with super shoes. They're often very expensive. So this was $320. They don't always last as long. This probably is going to do better than other shoes because it has reasonable outsole. So that's like a normal pair of shoes as far as how much rubber there is. So its durability should be in a reasonable range. You should get at least 500 kilometers out of a shoe like that. There are other shoes though, like Nikes, that are only meant to last 100 kilometers or 100 miles. That's, you're talking about spending $350 on a pair of shoes that you can only wear for a short amount of time. That's something to consider. Another thing to consider is that these shoes can sometimes be unstable due to their platform. So this, it's not that bad, but it is relatively narrow, especially around the midfoot. Something to consider. So brands. This is probably where you think I would go off the longest, but the truth is there are many great brands of running shoes, and it's not that big of a deal which one you pick. There's a few things to look out for, which I've mentioned, but you can't go wrong with most. But I do want to bring out some of my favorites because I think that there are some good reasons to consider them. So this shoe I showed you earlier, this is actually Skechers. Most people think of Skechers and they think of cheap, shoes you'd get as a kid. Not great. The truth is they're actually one of the best running shoe brands out there. They make shoes that are incredibly lightweight. Like this is about 300 grams, so it's on the heavier side, but it's also enormous, like over 30 mils of this super responsive foam. And this shoe, this has over 1,000 kilometers on it, and that's not even counting all of the walking I've done in it. So you're looking at running 1,000 kilometers in a pair of shoes that are super responsive. And this was like $130, something like that, which is cheap for running shoes in Australia. So that's one. Skechers. The thing with Skechers is you have to get Skechers Performance, which is their running shoes. They're like actually good running shoes because they have cheap crap too. But like, if you want the proper thing, Skechers Performance on runningwarehouse.com.au. Another one is Saucony. So Saucony is good. They basically only do running shoes and they have a very extensive lineup of different shoes. So this is the Ride. It's and the midsole is TPU and EVA blended. So it feels like a normal pair of running shoes, a kind of traditional fit, and average levels of firmness. These have 800 kilometers. They could easily go further. They also look reasonable, I think. So that's a good brand. The other thing that's good about them is they make so many. They make shoes that are for like running on ice, which like, I'm not going to do that, but like if you wanted to, you could. Saucony makes shoes for running on ice. How good is that? They also make super shoes. So, they have a great variety. And then the one you probably hear me talk about the most, and I do because I think they're great, is Hoka. So got mini Hokas. There's one, this is the Carbon X. This has a carbon fiber plate and it's, lovely shoe. It's another one. This was one of my top shoes this year. This is the Mach 4. So the thing that I like about Hoka is they are super lightweight and super comfortable. And basically you get really good levels of comfort for how much they weigh. So this, I think it was 230 or 240 grams, but you've got nearly 30 mils of midsole. And there's like most of their shoes, there's actually no outsole. So there's just this kind of rubberized EVA, which is both the midsole and the outsole. There's no actual hard rubber on the bottom. But having said that, they had pretty good life. These have over 770 kilometers on them, and they're in great shape. Like I could still run another 100 Ks in them. And then one that I've started to like recently is Asics. Asics has, they were kind of becoming dated as a brand, but they've come out with some really good new models. One is the Glide Ride. What this shoe does that's special is it's basically heavily rockered. So as you can see here, it has a rockered forefoot, and that basically makes it easier to transition from toe off. So that super easy. because of this. It also has a semi-rigid plate here. It's not carbon fiber, but it still works. And it's cheaper because it's not carbon fiber. And the shoe that I'm running in right now is the Nova Blast 2, which is from ASICS. And this is a blended rubberized EVA midsole. So this is super soft, super responsive. They've got a pretty good lineup as far as different shoes you can try. So yeah, I'd recommend them as well. The only brands or types of shoes that I wouldn't recommend for running, Adidas Ultra Boost, you've probably seen them or possibly worn them. They're incredibly heavy. They look fashionable, but they're not meant for running. And like I think the Ultra Boost, the most recent one, it's almost 400 grams for one shoe. I mean, that's an injury risk. Like that's like wearing lead pipes on your feet. Like don't do that, you know. If you want to wear them for like, you know, walking around, that's one thing, but they're not safe or good running shoes. So that would be the only brand I would say, or not even brand, that's just one type of shoe that I would say stay away from those if you're actually serious about running. So in summary, when you're buying running shoes, the key thing is try not to get distracted by marketing gimmicks. For most runners, the best daily training shoe is a shoe that fits comfortably, is affordable, suits your training needs, and doesn't have excessive wear. So if you keep those things together, you're going to get a good pair of shoes. A good place to go, I like, is runningwarehouse.com.au. Another place is runrepeat.com. And they basically combine all of the reviews for different shoes, and they also have different retailers. So they'll give you the best price plus like the overall rating of shoes. That's runrepeat.com and runningwarehouse.com.au. If you're looking at trying a pair of shoes on in person, I know we can't do that right now, but if you're looking at that in the future, Athlete's Foot is pretty good. And Pace Athletic, they have stores in Sydney and they're both good. So, yep. You've now heard me talk about shoes for nearly 30 minutes.